"You're trespassing on HOA property." The voice hit like a siren. Shrill, sharp, and cutting, straight through the morning calm. I looked up from my coffee still steaming in my hand and saw her red-faced marching toward me like she owned the earth beneath her sneakers. Karen Mitchell. Clipboard, clutch-tight HOA logo on her polo shirt, and that permanent scowl carved deep into her face. She had no idea that this morning confrontation would be the start of her own downfall, and the end of her HOA's power entirely. She stopped 42 feet from my porch, the exact line that marked the boundary between my property and hers, though she clearly didn't know it. "I'm calling the police right now," she said, jabbing her pen toward my house like a weapon. "You're in violation of at least a dozen HOA codes." Her voice carried that self-righteous tone of someone who'd been obeyed for years. I kept my face calm. 15 years in the project management had taught me that the loudest person usually has the weakest argument. "Ma'am, I think you're confused," I said evenly. "This property isn't under your HOA. I've got the deed and the survey maps inside if you'd like to see them." She blinked, clearly not used to resistance. "Every property in this neighborhood is under HOA jurisdiction," she snapped. "You can't just decide you're not." I took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down, and replied, "Actually, I can. This land predates your development by 15 years. My grandfather built this house in 1973, back when this entire place was still farmland." That's when her face went a shade darker. She muttered something about little claims and stormed off, threatening to call the lawyer. I figured that was the end of it. But 3 days later, I got a letter. 3 pages of legal-sounding nonsense demanding $1,500 in fines for a non-compliant fence, unauthorized mailbox, and unapproved paint color. All made up. All signed by the same woman who'd screamed at me that morning. That's when I knew this wasn't over. Over the next week, I saw her and a couple of HOA lackeys driving by, slowly snapping photos of my yard. Neighbors who used to wave started avoiding me. Packages got dropped at the gate instead of the porch. Every little thing started to feel like I was under a microscope. That's how harassment works, not through big scenes, but through the slow rot of feeling watched. At night, headlights paused outside my driveway just long enough to make my stomach tighten. I'd double-check the locks, pull the curtains early, and stare at the monitor showing the feed from my cameras. I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake buying this place. Maybe I should have moved into the next county. Maybe fighting wasn't worth it. And then one morning I found the orange paint. The word "violation" was sprayed across my mailbox post in bright block letters with arrows pointing toward my house. My grandfather's oak tree, 40 years old, was marked with the same paint. I pulled the footage from my security cameras and my blood ran cold. There she was, Karen, at 5:30 in the morning, sneaking onto my property with 2 other HOA members' spray cans in hand, laughing as they vandalized my land. Something in me flipped. That was the line. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Martinez came out, reviewed the footage, and confirmed exactly what I already knew: trespassing, vandalism, harassment. She filed the report, but even she warned me, people like this don't stop easy. She was right. The harassment got worse. Letters every few days. HOA inspectors pacing by my property line with clipboards whispering. One night, I caught Karen parked outside, lights off, just watching my house. I started to feel trapped in my own home. There was a moment, I'll admit it, where I almost gave up. Sitting on the couch at 2 a.m., surrounded by folders, screenshots, and stress, I thought, maybe I should just pay her fines and be done with it. Maybe it would buy me peace. But then, I saw that oak tree again, the one my grandfather planted when I was 10, and remembered what he told me that day. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out, son. They're about knowing what's yours and standing firm. That was the moment I decided I wasn't backing down. I hired a property law attorney named Laura Pierce Sharp. Calm, the kind of person who sees chaos as a checklist. I handed her a binder full of documents, photos, and the vandalism video. She spent an hour flipping through everything before looking up with a faint smile. "This is textbook HOA overreach," she said. "We'll start with a cease and desist letter. We sent it, certified mail official airtight, citing every legal boundary and violation. It demanded Karen stop her harassment immediately or face legal action. The next morning at 7 a.m., she showed up at my door in her bathrobe, clutching the letter like it was a death warrant. "You can't threaten me," she shouted. "I'm protecting this community from people like you." I didn't even open the screen door. From now on, I said quietly, "You talk to my attorney." Then I closed the door in her face while the cameras rolled. That video became the last piece of evidence Laura needed to file for a restraining order. But Karen, she didn't retreat. She called an emergency HOA meeting. I went. I wanted to look her in the eye while she lied. The room was packed, about 60 residents under flickering fluorescent lights, all whispering until they saw me walk in. Karen sat at the front behind a table with the HOA banner shoulders square chin up, acting like a judge about to deliver a sentence. She launched into a speech about a dangerous homeowner undermining community order. She called me a troublemaker, claimed my property was technically within HOA jurisdiction, and even held up a hand-drawn map she'd made herself. It looked like something a kid would sketch with crayons, completely false. When she finished, I asked to speak. The board chair hesitated but gave me 5 minutes. I walked up with my binder and said, "Mrs. Mitchell has been enforcing rules on property she doesn't own jurisdiction over. Here's the county survey, the original deed, and the assessor's letter, all confirming my property is outside HOA limits." Silence. Even the board members started shifting uncomfortably. One asked Karen, "Did you ever verify this?" Her answer sealed her fate. "I don't need surveys to know where our authority extends," she snapped. That was the moment everyone realized she'd been bluffing for years. After the meeting, the HOA announced a temporary suspension of enforcement on non-member properties, a polite way of saying, "We're backing off before we get sued." But Karen didn't stop. She doubled down, calling my neighbors patrolling at night and, eventually, stepping into my backyard again. This time, she wasn't sneaking. She was standing by my shed in broad daylight with a tape measure, muttering into her phone about zoning violations. My neighbor called me while I was at work. I drove straight home, pulled into the driveway, and there she was on my land again. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you're trespassing. Leave now." She looked up startled but defiant. "I'm conducting an inspection for a property you don't control," I shot back. "You have 30 seconds before I call the police." Her response: she kept taking pictures. Deputy Martinez arrived within 10 minutes. She recognized Karen immediately. "Ma'am, she said you are trespassing. Step away from the shed." Karen tried to talk her way out of it, insisting she had official authority, but the deputy didn't buy it. Watching Karen get handcuffed in my yard was one of those moments where anger finally gives way to relief. She still tried to shout as they led her away. I was just doing my job. That arrest changed everything. A week later, we were in court. McMichael versus Karen Mitchell and Meadowbrook HOA. The judge was an old-school property law veteran named Morrison. He'd seen every kind of HOA drama there was, and he didn't have patience for nonsense. My lawyer, Laura, presented the evidence like clockwork. The survey, the deeds, the harassment timeline, the vandalism footage. Even Karen's own social media posts where she bragged about keeping the neighborhood in line. Karen sat across from me, jaw tight, fidgeting with her pen. When the judge asked for her evidence of HOA authority, she reached into her folder and pulled out, of course, the same hand-drawn map. The courtroom went silent. "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said carefully, "this isn't a legal document." She stammered something about community boundaries, but it was over. The judge granted the restraining order, immediately ordered Karen to pay damages, and ruled that her actions constituted harassment, intimidation, and fraud. He turned to her and said, "Your behavior has been a systematic abuse of authority you never possessed." It wasn't just her downfall, it was the end of Meadowbrook HOA. Within weeks, the board dissolved under legal pressure. Investigations revealed that Karen had fined at least a dozen other homeowners who weren't even part of the HOA, pocketing thousands in illegal fees. The state attorney general opened a probe. Local news picked it up, HOA overreach exposed. By the time the lawsuits ended, Karen had lost everything. Her job, her house, her so-called reputation. She pled guilty to harassment, fraud, and trespassing. 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from any HOA position. The HOA itself ceased to exist. The irony, property values didn't drop like she always claimed they would. They went up, because people could finally breathe again. Neighbors started talking instead of spying. Kids played outside without being cited for noise violations. The oak tree my grandfather planted still stands tall at the corner of my land, its roots deep, unshakable, right where the old boundary lies. Sometimes I think about that first morning Karen screaming about trespassing while standing 42 feet on the wrong side of the line, and I can't help but laugh. She thought she had power. What she really had was an illusion and a clipboard full of lies. In the end, I didn't just defend my property. I proved that real authority doesn't come from a title or a board or a logo on a polo shirt. It comes from the law and from knowing you're right when everyone else is too afraid to fight. Lesson learned. Bullies fall fast when you stop being afraid of their clipboard.